All right, good evening. You're live with Faye on YouTube. I'm Faye, so thank you for joining me. Remember, every evening at 8 o'clock, we have a conversation here about things that are going on in our country, stuff that we must understand a little better. I have to keep reminding people that this is not a debate, this is a discussion. So we bring in people with different points of view so we can understand the problem a little better and form better, more informed opinions as citizens and as voters, which means, of course, that you will actually hear all of our panelists finish their sentences. No one will speak above each other and no one will lose their temper in the course of this conversation. That's the USP, that we'll all have even blood pressure at the end of it and no one's going to stress out. Tomorrow, we're going to have a discussion on the petrol prices. Remember, petrol prices in Mumbai are past 88 rupees a litre. There isn't a peep about it happening anywhere. The real problem there is more than half of that is state and central taxes, and we have to understand what is really going on. And we'll put together a strong panel for you, and we'll do that discussion tomorrow. But today, we have to have a very serious conversation on what's wrong with the Congress party. And I know that sounds like a WhatsApp joke, but we don't mean it as a WhatsApp joke. As of today, you know that there was a very fiery meeting that took place within the Congress party. Most of it was leaked to the media. A lot of it was being reacted to on Twitter. But it was in reaction to a very explosive letter of dissent written by 23 of the topmost leaders of that party. They were calling for a complete overhaul of how the party is run, and they were calling for different leadership. Now, when that letter came out or was leaked to the media, there was a flutter because a lot of people in this country thought, hey, you know what, about time. But it looks like after all of that and after the meeting and after what Rahul Gandhi is believed to have accused these people of colluding with the BJP, they didn't take it lightly. There was a call at the Congress, that the Gandhis take over again after that. There has now been, on last note, a resolution of the Congress Working Committee that has been released. It basically says, lots of bad things have happened over the last 6 months: corona, economy, job loss. Secondly, the two voices that have exposed the government most are Sonia Gandhi and Rahul Gandhi, and then it goes on to say how. Third, it talks about how the voices of the two leaders have inspired a generation of Indians, and then how. And then finally, it urges all of its members to not speak to the media or in public forums about their dissent or the problems that they have, and they see it as not in interest of the party or in interest of discipline. I think it's interesting the word discipline being used there, and it basically finally says that they have asked Sonia Gandhi to continue, and they have also asked her to make organizational changes as she sees fit. So there is some disappointment again about the fact that all of this came to naught and nothing really came off this entire letter and this entire meeting. But the reason why I'm having this discussion, and you know that I don't talk about politics a lot, is because this affects all of us as citizens. The health of the opposition affects the democracy. So here are the questions that we're asking this evening. Given what we saw happen in Rajasthan and what we saw happen in MP, and now this, is the Congress party now literally falling apart inside out? Secondly, does it seem like a party that has no room for dissent? Because Sachin Pilot, however that played out, kept saying that he just wanted someone to listen to him. Is there an issue with dissent in the party where it's not democratic and it doesn't want to listen to the voices of its own people? Thirdly, can the party in this poor health lead the opposition? And what kind of an opposition do we need in India? Is this the opposition that we truly deserve? Because without an opposition, really the democracy doesn't function. And that's the truth. And when the democracy doesn't function, people like you and I then are in deep trouble. What I'm super happy about, though, this evening is the panel that we've got together. Yogrendra Yadav is a political activist. He's the national president of Swaraj India. He's a keen follower of politics and elections in India. And he's a voice that a lot of people rely on. So I'm very happy that he's agreed to give us his time. Nidhi, Razdan, senior journalist, someone I respect a great deal and whose journalism and her model of journalism is something I have great respect for, has agreed to join us as well. Good evening, Nidhi. Also, senior journalist, Mr. Sharath Pradhan and Ms. Neerja Chowdhury join us through the course of this conversation. I welcome all of you and I thank you for your time. Mr. Yadav, if I may please start with you. First question. You had in fact written an article not long ago after the last general election saying the Congress should just make way and get out of the way because there are currently doing more harm than good. And that's the general gist that I picked up from that article. Has today's events actually confirmed to you that the Congress is no longer fit to lead opposition in India?
Faye, let's first of all see why we are discussing Congress. And as you rightly pointed out, it's not Congress per se. We are interested in the health of this country. At a moment when at least people like me believe that our republic is being dismantled, all our democratic institutions are being taken apart. So one thing that this country needs is opposition. And since Congress happens to be a large party with a national footprint and memory of people of a party that can do, so which in principle has at least a skeleton that can be revived. That's why this interest in the Congress. Otherwise, I'm nobody to advise Congress, and thank God I'm not their advisor at this moment. Two concessions that should be number one, it's not just Congress. I think the entire opposition looks in a very poor health right now. And if we were focusing on RJD, if we were focusing on SP, I don't think the situation would have looked very different. Number two, when you are in opposition down in dumps, everything that you do looks to be wrong, to be silly. Remember BJP in 2010? Looked as if the party could do nothing right. Everything was going wrong with the party. So one has to make all those concessions. But even after that, I would say at this moment, and this may be harsh, at this moment, if there's one thing that gives Mr. Modi maximum assurance, it is the Congress party. Congress party currently is in a state. So there is the idea of Congress and there is the Congress party in reality. The idea of a Congress is of a political party which is inclusive, which tries to live up to the idea of India. But the reality of Congress party has nothing to do with that idea of Congress. And that's why in exasperation, I had said after 2019, that if in this election, where really the future of the country was at stake, if Congress party did what it did in 2019 election, then please make way for something else. Because right now you are not a part of the solution, you are part of the problem. And unfortunately, the developments right now may have only confirmed that I personally thought, I'm nobody in the party and I have no business to comment on what's happening inside. But it seemed that those 23 people, leaders, had asked some real questions. The interest is not in who gains and who loses, but the important thing is, does the leading opposition party have the capacity to take inputs, to learn, to change, to adapt, to respond to the situation? But when I read the resolution that you read out, it looks like as things change, nothing changes. This is basically the resolution seems to say, all is well with the Gandhi family. They are doing just wonderful things and no one should protest. Now, if there is a message, hidden message there, it is very well hidden. If there is a message of learning, I must say it's a very well hidden message. And that's the disappointing part of it. Does the largest opposition party in this country have the capacity to respond to, learn from its mistakes, whatever mistake, every organization does, and to become that one single platform which would rally the forces for defense of this republic? This evening, we cannot be sure about that at all.
Well said. Actually, so Nidhi, as journalists, I remember in newsrooms, whenever there was a question of the Gandhi no longer leading the Congress, there'd always be jokes of, ha ha ha, this always happens. And then you'll have people sit on Dharna saying, no, we want the Gandhis back. And then they will come back and this is how it finally turns out. But for me, 23 very senior leaders writing that letter seems to have, it seems to have been thrown in the dustbin, really. It doesn't seem to have amounted to much. And the concern of crushing dissent, which is the exact accusation that the Congress makes of the BJP, should worry us even more, because then technically we're looking at an entire political ecosystem that's not open to dissent at all.
Well, just a couple of things there, Faye. Firstly, what you said, you have an entire political ecosystem that isn't very tolerant of dissent and difference of opinion. And that is true, whether it's in the Congress, whether it's other regional parties, and certainly the BJP. I mean, I think tomorrow, if you see a bunch of leaders writing a letter about Mr. Amit Shah and Mr. Modi and making that public, that will not be taken too kindly in the BJP either. I think while it is true that ideally the dissent should have been expressed internally to the top leadership directly, perhaps in a CWC or wherever. What I read in newspaper reports today, the Indian Express specifically, was that one of these leaders had written this letter for the third time to the Gandhis, and there had been no response earlier. So perhaps these leaders felt exasperated that if they didn't go public with this now, then they wouldn't be heard, because one of the charges that a lot of Congress leaders make is that the Gandhis are aloof. You don't get time with them. Rahul doesn't take calls, even from party colleagues who are near his age, or even just his generation, basically. So that aloofness may have been the reason they went public. Secondly, I want to make a point here about whether the Gandhis leave the Congress or not is actually the Congress's decision. I don't know whether the Congress would survive with a non-Gandhi at the helm. I think the fact is that the family has in a way been a binding factor. It has been a glue that has kept the party together. I don't know if they would do well without a Gandhi family member. However, maybe the time has come to take a risk, because you are at your lowest ebb in national politics. And if you don't take a risk now and try something new, when will you do it? But thirdly, I think that even if a Gandhi has to be at the helm, and if it is Mr. Rahul Gandhi, then he has to be in it full throttle 100%. It cannot be the way it is now, which is that I am there and yet I am not there. I have 1 foot in the door and I have 1 foot out of the door. I will go on, I don't grudge him his vacations. I don't grudge him his foreign trips. But you have to be a 24/7 politician to take on Narendra Modi and Amit Shah. And that is not what Mr. Rahul Gandhi is right now. So either you're in it or you're not. And I think that's the biggest thing, that this sort of interim, kind of neither here nor there arrangement that the Congress has. It's not working for the party, which is why it's drifting the way that it is. So more to follow as more points are raised. But this is really how I essentially see this argument. And I think that's why they're not able to deal with factionalism. They're not able to deal with infighting properly, or they just let things fester for a long time, whether it was in Rajasthan, in Madhya Pradesh, and so on. That doesn't, to me, justify why someone like Mr. Scindia, who's been a loyalist and who's been in the Congress for decades, suddenly saw the bright light, and felt that, the BJP was better. That's opportunism, and that's opportunistic politics. But I think that if you want Rahul Gandhi at the helm, he needs to be in it whole hog, or he needs to leave.
Mr. Pradhan, speaking up from what Nidhi just said about the fact that at the end of the day, Jyotiraditya Scindia saw some sort of light on the other side.
Yeah.
There's something that's always written about, say, family-run businesses. People who join talent that joins family-run businesses tends to leave because they never see the CEO cabin open. They always know it was going to go to the son, and then another child and another child is never going to be open to an outsider. Is that the case with the Congress party, where basically it's perpetually sort of reserved for the Gandhis, and talent doesn't see any room to grow? There's just no room there for their voices. There's no room for dissent. There's no room for growth. And it's something that the BJP might offer, or might be able to offer talent. Is the Congress at risk of losing a lot of its talent?
Faye, I think that is the biggest misfortune that the Congress seems to be facing. And while I fully agree with every word of what Dr. Yogrendra Yadav and Nidhi Razdan said, I would like to add a few more things there. First of all, it's very evident that Congress has ceased to be a democratic party. Because when you do not have room for dissent, then where are the democratic values?
Or elections.
When you are, and you've been criticizing the BJP on the same count, very valid criticism. Because now where is the difference as far as the hierarchy is concerned? Just as Narendra Modi doesn't accept any kind of, there's no scope for dissent there in that party. Likewise, considering the people like Advani and Joshi and all have been completely thrown out virtually. So in the same manner, if the only difference is here, you put up a facade of bringing about some kind of change. Every time there is this talk of entrusting the Congress to a non-Gandhi, there appears to be a ray of hope that at long last you will have some opposition if the Congress gets revived. And as Nidhi rightly pointed out, it's time to take the risk. Where is this impression that has been built over the years that the Congress will not survive without the Gadis? Then where the hell is it surviving with the Gadis? The fact of the matter is that it is, and now Gadis also, I think it is more limited to the mother and son. As a matter of fact, I once jokingly said on one of the TV channels that it seems that Italian mothers have the same putra prem as Indian mothers. So because I feel that Priyanka has, even if it was there could have been change in the Gadi. Priyanka has never been tried out. To say that she was brought in for the UP elections and tried and she failed is a misnomer. Because when you send in somebody in a half-hearted manner, barely 2 weeks she was campaigning, and then you declare her as useless. So she has not been given an opportunity for whatever reason. That's their family affair. But the family has to rise above the party. They have to, I mean, family has to rise above the interests, because they have to realize that ultimately it is the party. If today, even Congress sympathizers, a lot of Congress sympathizers feel that the family is responsible for what the party is in today. So, I mean, some realization has to dawn somewhere, and when will it? And as Dr. Yadav rightly pointed, it is not just about the question is, we are all interested in the democracy of this country, and the manner in which democratic values are being completely battered in this country. Something needs to be, and only a strong opposition can bring it back. Otherwise, I don't know what we are going to face.
So let me take that back to Mr. Yadav. Yogrendra Yadav, you did say, that the whole point at the end of the day, and everyone seems to be in agreement, that we need a strong opposition in order for the democracy to function. But if the Congress continues as is, and that seems to be the tone or the intention today, then what happens? What is the quality of the opposition, and what is the health of the democracy?
I'm afraid the established opposition is in no position to take on Mr. Modi right now. BJP dominates. BJP dominates not merely because they have majority in parliament, not merely because they have captured all state institutions, not merely because they have disproportionate influence in the media as well, but also and principally because they enjoy legitimacy, that ordinary people find them acceptable. So any serious opposition would have to reach the people and say to them, look, there's something wrong. What four of us sitting in the studio may agree, that is to say, this republic is in danger, that foundations of democracy are being shaken, as Sharath Bhai said right now. The point is, most Indians do not feel that way. Most Indians don't see it that way. And therefore, you need someone to take it. Congress had the largest potential, simply because of its presence. Congress has very little cadre. It never was a cadre-based party. So it cannot take on the BJP as far as the cadre is concerned. But Congress had a brand. Congress had a brand image. The problem today is that the brand is soiled. The first thing that when you think of the Congress, the first thing that comes to your mind is either corruption or family, which is not to say that other parties do not have that. I mean, if you run from DMK up to Akali party, every single party is captured by a family. And I would suspect almost all of them are reasonably deep into corruption. But in terms of brand image, today, Congress suffers from both these charges more than anyone else. So the brand is soiled. There is no brand positioning. There is no attempt to reorient. There is no understanding. So what do you want to do on 5th of August? On 5th of August, Congress looks like a very, trying to play team B of the BJP. How do you see on Kashmir? So there is no attempt at new brand positioning. And finally, there is no brand ambassador. Frankly, Rahul Gandhi today is more of a liability. I do not believe that he's a bad person. I personally have written that whenever I met him a few times, I found him to be more intelligent than most people think he is. I found him to be more sincere than most politicians. But that's not the image he enjoys. And the trouble is, being in a Rajiv Gandhi kind of a position where government is handed to you on a platter is one thing. And being placed in a Rahul Gandhi kind of a position where you have to lead the fight from the street. These are two entirely different situations. And it is not clear if Rahul has in him the capacity to lead the fight from the street. Now, in that context, this is where the opposition, so Congress's failure is almost the opposition failure writ large. And I personally feel that if at all a serious opposition will come to Mr. Modi's government, which must be the case, which must come, it will come probably from movements. Remember, the opposition to Indira Gandhi initially came from Bihar movement. The opposition to Congress in the late 80s came from what looked like a movement at that time, Jan Morcha. The opposition to Congress in 11-12 came from a movement. To my mind, movement is where movements outside mainstream political party is where probably the spark and the strength will come from.
Well, Neerja Chowdhury joins us as well now, and after she's had her chance to have her opening statements, I would like all of the panelists to just come in and add whatever you feel. Ms. Chowdhury, there's been a general consensus that the Congress is ailing and given its current status might not be healthy for the democracy. I just want to point out that, while we were talking about talent, people like Captain Amrinder, for example, regional leaders, Shashi Tharoor, that's popping up on the chat window. People are asking about these leaders. Where is the future on the national stage for them? The party doesn't seem very active in picking out talent, in encouraging talent, whereas we see the BJP do that in a very structured pyramid level where they're constantly, look at, for example, Tejaswi Surya in Bangalore, who got picked out for certain reasons, but is being given platforms nationally. Various leaders within the BJP who rise up that structure because there is a structure. Is the Congress's lack of structure, lack of, at the end of the day, whoever's running that ship is not doing a very efficient job. Is that what's hurting the Congress, in your opinion?
The response of the Congress Working Committee to the letter by the 23 leaders of the party, wanting the party to be energized, is exactly what ails the party. They turned it around, the issue of the Gandhi family, instead of addressing ABCD or what the letter listed out. And not only, a lot of people expected what has come out of it, because that's the way the Congress functions, and the Congress is not changing. It's business as usual. And of course, they've got now, the only good thing that's happened is that finally, maybe 6 months later or a year later, the party may get a full-time president who has gone through the process of a democratic election. So that is a good thing that's come out. The second good thing that's come out of today...
But Ms. Chowdhury, do you believe that will happen, or do you think it's going to be Rahul Gandhi?
That's a good question.
Well, even if it's Rahul Gandhi and he goes through the process of election, if the party wants Rahul Gandhi, so be it. You and I feel, I think Yogrendra ji was saying, and maybe Rahul Gandhi has taken up with more courage and more frontally issues of COVID, of China, of the economy than any other opposition leader. We must give it to him. But, and this is a big but, he is simply not clicking with the people of India.
Yes.
Now, the Congress party has to do introspection on why. Does he lack credibility? Does it lack what it takes to play that role? Is it his language? Is it that India has moved on, young India has moved on and is disinclined towards the politics of entitlement, particularly when it's faced with somebody like Narendra Modi? So the Congress will have to take note of that. And what the Congress Working Committee has done today, they've taken, for 6 years, this kind of introspection was not done. And even in terms of leadership, Sonia Gandhi, back to Rahul Gandhi, back to Sonia Gandhi, now again looking at Rahul Gandhi. So it's a very disappointing thing. I agree. You and I have a stake in the Congress party simply because we need a strong opposition in this country if parliamentary democracy is to survive. I endorse what others have said about that. That is why you and I are exercised about it. So the Congress in that sense doesn't belong to the Congress, a few Congress leaders.
Yes. In fact, I had a conversation just before this with Mahua Moitra of the TMC on a different platform, and she was talking about how the opposition is completely helpless inside of parliament because they have no numbers, and which is why they constantly go with PILs to the Supreme Court, because they have no voice in parliament. And that's the reason, I mean, without that voice in parliament, it actually becomes quite a useless
voice in the Supreme Court, but anyway. That's what I get called up for contempt.
That's true. And that was going to be my next question to you, and the rest of the panel, please react as well. What happens now? What sort of, if we look at the environment right now, what is your assessment of the opposition as we see it on the national level? On a scale of 1 to 10, what would you give them combined altogether?
I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd give them a 2. You know, I mean, the Modi government doesn't have a majority in the Rajya Sabha and has been able to ram through every legislation that it wants to, including something as massive and life-changing and life-altering as Article 370 and dilution, which was done in a matter of some hours. It was something that should have been debated for days on end. Yeah. And I would like to know what the India's opposition parties did about that. You see the constitutional relationship of an entire state changed with India, and you see it bifurcated and you see it downgraded to a union territory, and the opposition just let the BJP walk with it. Yeah. And that comes to another point Yogrendra Yadav made, which is about, therefore, the Congress in particular, confused about what its identity should be, because I don't think the Congress knows what it stands for. So it doesn't know, for instance, even though, I mean, Article 370, Nehru history, you know, all of that is there on one hand, but today's Congress doesn't know whether it should, support Article 370. Do you remember all the sort of confusion there was last year?
The Ram Mandir
now has supported, I mean, even now, then you have the whole Ayodhya, the whole temple thing, kya kare? So you become sort of this B team of the BJP. So what do you stand for? What exactly do you stand for? Now, there are other issues as well. Now, this whole thing about Rahul Gandhi versus Mr. Modi, I agree, as Neerja Chowdhury rightly said, Rahul Gandhi has effectively or rightly raised, maybe not effectively, but rightly raised, for instance, the issue of the health crisis with COVID, the China intrusions, etc. But yes, he's not clicking. Part of the reason may be also that there is a massive sort of right-wing propaganda that goes out, not just on social media, on Twitter and Facebook against him, but family WhatsApp groups that, and as Yogrendra Yadav rightly said, actually, personally, he's a far more intelligent guy. He's a nice guy. And he knows his stuff. But, there is this whole persona that the BJP has built about him. And I think the BJP, the biggest advantage they have is Mr. Modi and his personality and the cult of personality that they've built around him. So when you take Rahul Gandhi in a face-off, in a personality contest with Mr. Modi, it's not a contest. So I think the challenge for the Congress is, how do you take on Narendra Modi and the BJP without making it a personality contest? It is difficult. I'm not saying I have the answers, but this is the difficulty that they have to contend with. And also face some issues. For instance, Rafale was an important issue. We talked about it on NDTV night after night as well. If there are questions that have to be raised, they must be raised. But was Rafale an issue that resonated with common people in times of economic distress in particular? Like, for the average Joe.
But Nidhi, they haven't been able to turn around the migrant labor problem. They haven't been able to turn around COVID. They haven't been able to turn around the economy and job loss. The truth is that at the end of the day, as people who have, let's say, for example, run newsrooms, you and I, we know that someone might be well-intentioned and intelligent and really nice as a person, but if you can't do the job, you can't do the job.
That's exactly my point. So I think the challenge for them is that it is, whether you like it or not, the BJP today is Narendra Modi. It's not about a party organization. That's and Yogrendra Yadav would know better. How would the BJP do? Is the BJP an idea, or is it the idea of Modi that's resonating in India today and his personality? And there's definitely, I also see a very sort of a change in the way Mr. Modi is being branded by himself and his party today. There's a larger than life image that he's acquiring. And COVID, in a way, ironically, has helped him acquire that of being not just the prime minister, an elected leader who is accountable to citizens, but who is something more than that. And in that, I think, I don't know, maybe Yogrendra can answer that. Like, what does the Congress do in that personality driven sort of domain, political scenario. What does the Congress do?
Right, and I just want to read out a couple of messages that are coming in on Super Chat. I encourage our viewers to use Super Chat to support us. Bharat Raval says, a party is not democratic if they don't allow another person to lead. Hyperbole says, I'm glad to see Nidhi back in action. We've missed her. Congress needs democracy within themselves. And I know that the character assassination of Rahul Gandhi has been something they've been through, but I think this is what Nidhi just said is resonating, which is that yes, the BJP gave Rahul Gandhi a tough time, but if he needs to be a successful politician, he has to learn how to overcome that. That's the game he's playing. He can't go boo-hoo-hoo, it's too hard or it's too rough a game.
Full time.
Yes. And, I just wanted to share one photograph. When Kumaraswamy was sworn in as Chief Minister of Karnataka, and this was back in 2018, there was this whole show of unity among the opposition, right? And I remember looking at it on primetime television thinking, whoa, okay, this might mean something. And now when we look at that photograph again, where did all of these people go? That show of unity has been decimated. There's almost nothing left of it, except for maybe Rahul and Sonia Gandhi are still trying in some way to hang on to whatever it is that they had. So, and that's my question to the panel, whoever wants to take it on. And Mr. Yadav, if you want to pick up where Nidhi Razdan left off as well, do we see that, right now that this sort of unity is not going to come back because there is no clear leader here? There's no one to actually bring them together.
Faye, we must remember that opposition unity did not work in 2009. So that famous photograph did not amount to very much, not because they did not come together. I mean, I would say in 80% cases, they did come together. The trouble is that their coming together did not inspire the Indian people. It looked like a gang which was coming together to oust one man who is there to do something for this country. That's the image BJP managed to sell.
That's right.
So to my mind, the real question is not merely about opposition unity. Opposition unity may be required, may be one of the useful things. But right now, an opposition unity by itself is not a solution. Please remember, not only 2019, you can go back to 1971. This was a grand alliance of the opposition in 1971 against Indira Gandhi. And it was a grand defeat of that alliance because Indira Gandhi could simply say, मैं कहती हूँ, ये कहते हैं इंदिरा हटाओ, मैं कहती हूँ गरीबी हटाओ. That one thing demolished that entire opposition. To go back to the point that Nidhi was making, I think the important thing is not that you are sincere, that you say the right thing, some degree of courage, all this is right. But in politics, it just goes on to say why sincerity and plain speaking is not the highest virtue, is not the only virtue. What you require above all is political judgment. And that judgment requires your having your finger on the pulse of an ordinary person. For all the things that I may hold against Mr. Modi, and I personally hold a lot of things against him because I really think that he's out to dismantle democracy in this country. But one thing that you cannot deny is that he has his fingers on the pulse of an ordinary person. Sitting in Delhi, surrounded by all the sycophants, he can still anticipate and judge, okay, if I do this, this is how it's going to be perceived in a village in UP or a village in Gujarat. Can Rahul Gandhi do that? That's a question. Political. And then second, ability to assess. Second is to communicate. So Nidhi mentioned Rafael, rightly so, very big question. Or the questions of or Chinese occupation. The simple fact is China is occupying our land right now. But that is not what people sitting in the village think. So ability to communicate in a way that looks credible, which makes sense and is credible. This is not what the Congress possesses today.
Yes.
In the absence of that, this won't work. And I completely agree with Neerja that this letter that has come, this resolution that has come today, this resolution is a living example of what is wrong with the Congress party.
Mr. Yadav, there is a question for you from Ur-I who says, first, good to see Nidhi back. Nidhi, you need to do this more often. Question for Mr. Yadav, do you think there's space in India for a people-funded movement to build an opposition? Because you hinted to something like that in your earlier answer.
I mean, there should be. This is music to my ears, but then how does that matter? All of us have our private fantasies and dreams. So do I. My fantasy and dream, of course, is that we need a people's movement, and so on. To my mind, the real question to ask at the moment is this. There is a vacuum in opposition.
Mhm.
Can the established opposition fill that vacuum somewhat meaningfully? To my mind, frankly, the problem is not family control and lack of democracy, because that is across the board. There is not a single party which is free from that. BJP may be free from family control, but it's not free from lack of democracy. And Nidhi mentioned, if such a letter was to be I mean, the become thrown out of the party in BJP. So the problem is not so much of this too. The problem is capacity to learn, capacity to respond, even with family control, even with lack of democracy. So you have, let's imagine it's a family control business. But even in a family control business, you respond to the market. You assess, okay, my product is bad. Let me change my product. This particular product is not selling. This brand is not working. Do they even have that capacity? I suspect they don't. And to my mind, while people-funded politics may look like a distant dream, I personally think that the real spark against this regime may not come from any of the established opposition parties. The initial spark will have to come from outside the established opposition party. What shape it takes later, we don't know.
Right.
But
I also want to point out the fact that it's, we've also, our politics has also been reduced, like Nidhi pointed out, to politics of individuals and not of parties, right? And we're seeing this happen also on the state level. You've got Mamata Banerjee in Bengal, you've got Jagan Mohan Reddy in Andhra. It's becoming about individuals. It's becoming about, pushing ideas of people. But I just want to put this out there because Nidhi mentioned that that this is a different image. The peacock video that the Prime Minister released of him sitting with the peacock. He looks much older than what we're used to seeing him. I want the panel's comments on what branding or what messaging this is, in contrast to whether the Congress or the rest of the opposition is even able to think in this fashion. Mr. Pradhan, do you want to try?
The peacock is only reminding me of Modi now thinking in terms of the peacock throne or something. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. And, at the moment, the problem is that he has built such a cult around himself that, to my mind, it seems we are in some form. First of all, it's very evident that we are heading more towards the presidential form. It is individual based party political leadership that is making all the difference to the people. And today, as at one point of time, it was Indira is India and India is Indira. Today, Modi is BJP and BJP is Modi. And that is, and this cult is certainly not a good sign for democracy. And but the problem is, when you talk to people who are supposed to be, who in common parlance are referred to as bhakts, you tell them, then they say, who should we vote for if not him? When you tell them that this is becoming somewhat like what we had seen a country in Europe in the 30s, then they say, then who should we vote for?
Mr. Pradhan, who should they vote for? Where is the alternative? Let me now genuinely ask you, where is the alternative?
But the point is, what is more important, you have to look beyond just a political. Agreed. At the moment, there is nobody in the opposition who can match the skills, the machinations, the aura, and the personality of the larger-than-life personality of Narendra Modi. So that is where, as Yogeshwar Yadav rightly pointed out, something has to emerge. But the point is, people's minds are so badly and madly affected by this aura that they are not ready to. They are not even ready to. You can't even argue with people now.
But can
it's coming to that stage.
Yes,
please. Just because on that point about there not being an alternative. I mean, there doesn't have to be an alternative if people are angry enough with the government to vote against it. It happened to Indira Gandhi, right? After
exactly.
And it happened to Mr. Vajpayee. after his term, nobody expected Mr. Vajpayee to lose. The Congress didn't have a prime ministerial face or a candidate.
That's
Dr.
right.
Manmohan Singh's name came up in a meeting that happened after the election results. I remember covering that as a reporter. So there was no face and who. I mean, Mr. Vajpayee was a huge personality too. So sometimes I wonder. I mean, again, I would like to ask Yogrendra Yadav that what is different than today? Is it not possible for people to vote against a government, even if there's no viable opposition face?
Guys, that is what they need to
It has
understand.
happened in the past with no less than an Indira Gandhi.
If I may,
That is
Nidhi, I think that happens when you are so angry with the government that you say, okay, in America, they say throwing the rascal out. When you're so angry, you say, no matter who's the alternative, even if there is none, I want this man out. That's not where it's reached. So the point about Mr. Modi's management is that there is dissatisfaction, but that dissatisfaction never translates into anger. And in between these two things, he gets to manage. So if for whatever reason voters do reach that level, then it's like 1977. Then even a lamppost would be there to defeat Mr. Modi. But that's not where people have reached. And this is about manipulation. This is about very creative communication. I should say something about the peacock thing. This might shock many of us, but I must say this. Our criticism, so let us say we go to a cinema hall, and I would use my generation images. You go to Coolie and you watch Amitabh Bachchan. Mm-hmm. So you have two ways of responding to it. One, you can say, oh, this man has such a posh house in Bombay. He's pretending to be a coolie. He's really not a coolie. Now, that's of course true. But is that serious theater criticism? Is that serious film criticism? Would anyone take you seriously if you said that? Now, this image that we are witnessing, please remember, it would have taken at least 2 or 3 hours of the Prime Minister of India in this shooting. Let's call it for what it is. This must have been a very carefully done 10-camera shoot in which the Prime Minister of India must have spent 2 hours at least, if not more. Why is he doing so? What is the message being communicated? Is it enough to simply say this man is acting? We need to understand the message being sent. And the point is to deconstruct these images. His team must have spent days planning and plotting this, days deciding angle from which these pictures are to be taken. And I think the opposition, someone in opposition must have that kind of agility, not to produce fake images of this kind, but to understand what these images are doing and to respond to it with different kinds of images. This is not happening. You need that kind of high order thinking. Our thinking at the moment is at the level of saying, oh, Mr. Amitabh Bachchan is not a coolie in his real life. Of course, but how does that matter? We have to get into a more creative ways of responding to it. And that, I'm afraid, is missing in the opposition right now, a different level of thinking. Our response is a Stone Age response to Mr. Modi. He politics in a different direction altogether. It is purely a play of images. And you cannot defeat a play of images by saying, oh, these are just images.
And I want to bring in Neerja on that point, but let me just read out a few more messages. Jayan Jha says the main problem is the Congress does not have a new generation leader. I don't believe the shortage of talent might be the problem. I think the shortage of this position in the vacancy at the top is the problem at this point. Animate, not Congress. All opposition parties have disappointed us. They're worried more about their own future than people's issues. Again, without the people, what future are we actually being, are you guarding if you're not going to look after people? Dip says the Congress missed the chance to be taken seriously by the people. They've made someone from outside the Gandhi family in charge. They would have done better. Neerja Chowdhury, your comment really on the peacock images and the messaging that you believe is being sent out, and whether you believe the opposition is at all ready to take on or to be even remotely competition of any sort to the BJP.
I will give you what somebody told me 2 days ago in Chennai as my response to your question. This person said Tamil Nadu will never turn the BJP way because of Hindu Brahmin rather, Brahmin, anti-Brahminism, and because of Hindi. And then during the course of the conversation, we were talking about what the BJP strategy was going to be in Tamil Nadu, them wanting to reach out to Shashi Kala, who will soon be out of jail, etc., etc. And he said that Prime Minister can give somebody like Shashi Kala legitimacy as keeping the legacy of Jayalalitha, taking the legacy of Jayalalitha forward. I said, how can he give the legitimacy? So this person said, people of Tamil Nadu make a distinction between BJP and Narendra Modi. Narendra Modi is very different from BJP. He is the karma purush. They see him, view him very differently. So the management of dissatisfaction, preventing it from turning into anger, is this personality called Modi, who wants to be Yug Purush, who's being projected as Karam Purush, who doesn't want anything for himself. He's leading the party. He's a strong person out there with a certain kind of image. And Peacock and so many other things that his team does to give him that image is all part of that design that they're crafting. Second thing I want to say to you, the Congress's opposition, certainly there isn't no match to him, and nowhere are they moving in that direction. But if the Congress strategy is, let's wait for the mood in the country to turn. Let Modi make mistakes, then our chance will come. The country will turn to us. We are the pan-Indian party. But by then, would you even have kept your flock together to be able to play that role? People are not going to be with you.
Question.
Yeah, unless you start to revive now. And today, the unfortunate thing is that the younger generation in the Congress party is not talking about how to revive. They are saying, can Congress be revived at all?
Yes.
There is a hopelessness coming in. And people will see greener pastures. And there was no attempt today to look at things afresh. It was a very disappointing day for many people who thought a new note would come from the Congress party.
Absolutely. Nidhi, there's a question from Sai Krishna who says, if I remember correctly, Rahul Gandhi had got an ex-CEC Lindo to consult on internal democracy within the party, and then nothing came of it.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you a story. Last year, when this whole fiasco happened for the Congress with the election results and Rahul Gandhi stepped down, I met a few young Congress leaders, all close to Rahul's age. And I said, well, is this an opportunity for you all to genuinely throw your hat in the ring and contest the elections for the party president post? And one or two of them was they predicted this outcome. They said, are you insane? They were very clear. They said anybody who tries to even suggest a non-Gandhi will be chewed up by the Gandhis themselves and the party, and a clamor will grow for the Gandhis only to come back. And they will never forget that we raised this issue in the first place, and we'll be left out in the cold. So even though we do want a non-Gandhi at the helm and other people to get a chance, we will not dare raise our voices. And look what's happened today. I mean, as we've all pointed out, instead of looking at the merits of the issues raised in the letter by these 23 leaders, the party has just ended up making this an exercise about support for Sonia and Rahul Gandhi.
Yep.
And I have to say that I just wonder what they've been doing for the last 6 years. It's not that this election defeat happened only last year. They went down to 44 seats in 2014. 6 saal se aap kya kar rahe hain? What are you doing? And they're still floundering. And so, today, most people reacted to this news of Sonia Gandhi continuing with a laugh. I told somebody last night, Faye, somebody asked me, what do you think will happen? I said, wait and see. She'll probably continue for a few more months because they won't be able to resolve anything. It's happened exactly the way most journalists and political analysts predicted that it would. And that's sad.
Mr. Pradhan, in fact, the letter said that, we've not had any sort of reviewing of the situation. We've not done any sort of introspection or critical thinking within the party, that there is a lack of discussion, within the party meetings. It's just become rote now. There's a speech and the obituaries are read out. And in spite of that, to see that letter didn't, like Ms. Chowdhury pointed out, the points in that letter were not addressed at all. It shows that maybe this is not the party that has to lead our opposition. This is not the party that's going to survive for very long.
No, that is what they seem to be proving by their actions. They seem to be proving that they are never going to rise beyond the Gandhi family, no matter how much all this facade and drama that takes place. For once I was very hopeful when this came in. Okay, they are going to, at long last, probably realization will dawn, and Sonia Gandhi will or Rahul Gandhi will move out, and they will have somebody democratically elected there. But once again, it's the same old story. So where is the hope? Even the last ray of hope seems to be going. And this is what is going to, as Neerja rightly pointed out, the younger generation in the Congress, the younger leadership, they will finally, out of disgust, they will look for greener pastures. And you can't blame them. At the end of the day, when you realize that you are just a nobody, fine. Even in BJP, it's not as if Jyotiraditya Scindia is going to get anything great in BJP. There, unless you have the Nagpur route, you can't rise. But the fact of the matter is that here, what you are not going to grow here, and your voice is not going to be heard. So something.
But Sharath, I have to say that someone like Jyotiraditya Scindia, if he was I also see this party hopping as deeply problematic, especially from one ideology to another. It's so opportunistic. Mr. Scindia can't wake up after X number of decades of being in the Congress and suddenly realize that there was a problem of dynasty and corruption and all of that. And run to the. If you have your principles in place and you have your courage of conviction, form your own party. I said that about Sachin Pilot as well. If you really truly believe in the politics that you've been talking about for all these years, form your own party. Jumping ship, frankly, will make these.
That is opportunism.
That would be my next question to the panel. And
sheer political opportunism.
Absolutely.
Yes, we've seen enough of this happen in the history of the Congress party in the last, several decades, where they've had these breakaways that turned into regional parties. Several of the regional parties.
Mamata Banerjee,
or it's Mamata Banerjee, or it's even Jagannath Reddy. They're all breakaways from the Congress. But is there a reluctance to do that now? Why isn't that happening? Why didn't Sachin Pilot or Jyotiraditya Scindia break away and form their own regional parties?
But it's easier to do it this way, no? Who wants to work hard?
I don't think they have that kind of support to do so.
Support, and who wants to work hard?
What? Very true. Unfortunately, in the Congress, the culture has been कि ऊपर वाला कुछ नीली छतरी टूटेगी और कुछ हाथ में मिल जाएगा. Not, they don't want to work for it. They haven't, and that's the reason, as I think Yogrendra Yadav had pointed out, that they are still waiting. Or I think Neerja said that they keep on waiting. That okay, Modi will commit some mistakes, and then we'll get a chance. It is not as if they are not going to make any effort, which is what needs to be imbibed. And for that, you certainly need a change of leadership. Somebody who can give them that kind of, inspire them to do that. Today, that point, I mean, in a state like Uttar Pradesh, to where I belong, Congress is in such a state. They have a party president who was arrested on very, very flimsy grounds, and he couldn't even get bail, and there was no reaction from anybody. The fellow remained in jail for or more than a month, and for what? Simply because he had promised that because Priyanka Gandhi had said that we'll provide buses for this migratory labor during this corona crisis. And this fellow was blamed because Yogi Adityanath decided that, okay, now out of the 700 buses, 50 that you mentioned are not buses, they are three-wheelers and two-wheelers. So you uttered lies, so you go to jail. And on that, can you imagine, with all these top lawyers in the Congress party sitting in Delhi, the poor chap didn't even get bail. So if that is the kind of structure you have in the state, which once upon a time was responsible for taking them to power for so many 40 years, and there's nobody. So the point is, where and over the years, somebody, the disillusionment started with somebody like Rita Bahuguna, who was rated as a good president, who was doing something, who had good rapport with the people, partly because of her father's background, whatever. They brought her to such a stage that she quit and went to it was not a change of heart that As if BJP was offering, fine. Later on, she contested election on the BJP ticket and became a minister. But she would always say that I missed the Congress. She would say that because she said that in the problem is why she left. She was humiliated, and then you bring in somebody, a deadwood, somebody like Nirmal Khatri who was dead and forgotten for years. So you just because you don't like somebody's face, that's not the way to run a party. So
Nidhi has to
Rahul
sign
Gandhi
up
is well-meaning, all right,
but I have one very quick question for the panel. Sai Krishna has written in and said it's more like the lack of political machinery. The BJP has an organization like the RSS, which is on the ground. The Congress doesn't have any such organization. Mr. Yadav, do you believe that it is the lack of
Never had.
or is it the lack of a general right now?
No, RSS has always been there. So what?
Congress has never had that kind of a body.
I agree with Nidhi and Sharathji. Look, when Congress won in 2004, it did not have organization. It did not have cadre. BJP still had cadre. BJP had the RSS. So that's a structural advantage BJP has had, structural disadvantage Congress has had. But Congress has been able to turn its disadvantage into an advantage, being able to catch everyone and anyone, etc. Just 3 quick points I wanted to make. One is about why Congress leaders are not turning regional parties. To be absolutely frank, Mr. Amrinder Singh leads an Amrinder Congress in Punjab. He occasionally writes nice letters, which would please Sonia Gandhi. But if the leaders of Delhi were to decide tomorrow to replace Amrinder Singh, you would see a regional political party there. And I think, frankly, that is also the case with Rajasthan now. It is Mr. Gehlot's Congress which is in power. It is not Delhi's Congress which is in power. So something of that kind is happening now in many states as well. Number 2, for political leaders, you can take economics on loan. For a political leader, it's not necessary that you know economics, that you know defense policy, that you know technology. But political judgment is not something that you can take on loan. This is one thing a political leader has to have intuitively. And if the leader of Congress doesn't have it, then they don't have it. You cannot have 20 advisors who would give you political judgment. They can give you everything else. But this gut sense of politics you need.
That's right.
That is not what you have. And third point is, Congress leaders are very fond of saying, they actually come and say it on studios, we are a 130-year-old party.
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem. They actually look a 130-year-old party. There is say what India is.
Very well said.
Someone who can take fresh decisions, someone who can surprise. So today, like Neerja Di, I thought there would be some surprise. And at the end of it, when you see this letter, you see.
I did not. I didn't expect any surprise.
No, but Mr. Yadav is right, because here you have a 70-year-old prime minister who appeals to a younger population and seems like a fresher choice, as opposed to say a 50-year-old Rahul Gandhi and his
I
entire
actually don't even think age has anything to do with it. I don't think that it's a young old battle. I mean, there are people who are, we see that with Mr. Gehlot or Amrinder Singh, age. It doesn't matter. It's your political experience that also counts for something. In fact, I think Amrinder Singh would have been a very good Congress president, because if you see, the BJP is very reluctant to attack someone like him. He has that 4G background. He has a very clear line on national security matters that they find difficult to argue with. And he certainly, as a multiple time chief minister of Punjab, certainly commands a certain degree of respect of his own, but that's another debate to have on another day.
Last question to Ms. Neerja Chowdhury. Yogrendra Yadav asked this question. There's a vacuum in the opposition. Who's going to fill that vacuum? Because where do you see? What do you see, Ms. Chowdhury?
I think if as Yogrendra Yadav says, movements pick up, dissatisfaction grows, anger, that's the kind of situation we are looking at, where people don't look at who they are voting for. That is Akrosh. 77, we saw that. But that approach we're a long way off for, because the
Long way off.
management of that, dissatisfaction, they're doing very well, the BJP. So whatever comes will come from the ground. We can't see who it will throw up, what kind of alignments it will lead to, opposition unity. One of the points that has been raised in this letter by the 23, the 6th point, is the people who left the Congress should come back and form a greater, bigger, larger Congress. Sharath Pawar, Mamata Banerjee, Jagan Reddy, none of them who now call the shots and replace the Congress in their respective states enjoy an autonomy of functioning. Why will they want to come back to the
Absolutely.
Congress? Except if there may be a chance of some kind of cooperation, collaboration, if there was a non-Gandhi at the helm of affairs of the Congress party. That is the reason why they left.
Yes, and we had this conversation during the elections of how the Gandhis weren't able to build any sort of alliances with any of these people in any of these states. So they wound up cutting votes everywhere because they just weren't able to build that conversation. So if the opposition is going to come from the ground, then someone needs to be sowing those seeds quickly, because we're looking at another 4 years. And it does seem at this point like the BJP has no opposition inside of parliament or even outside on the playing field of Indian politics. This has been the most fun I have had on a panel in a very long time. Nidhi, Razdan, Yogrendra, Yadav, Neerja, Chowdhury and Sharath, Pradhan, thank you for giving me your time. I know our audience has appreciated it as well. And I hope we can have these conversations again in the future. For our audience, like, share.
Nice to be with the other panelists, but as a co-panelist for once.
Yeah, it's nice to see you in that role.
Yeah, good to see you, Nidhi.
Good to see you guys. Thank you. Bye, Faye. Take care.
Thank you. Our audience, remember, like, share, subscribe, tell other people that we do this every evening at 8 o'clock and tell them to come and join us. It's our pleasure to be here at 8 o'clock every evening. Thanks for watching. Good night.